Hi guys, it's Josh Rubin back here with the Rubin special at Douglas Elliman in New York City, joined by none other than my friend Stephen James, CEO of the New York City Brokerage. Stephen, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here, Josh. Always good to see you.
You too. So, Stephen, we're going through unprecedented times, and met with our share of challenges, of course. But I'm seeing every day that Douglas Elliman is continuing to innovate. We're offering lots of great programs for our agents, of course, and we're actually seeing deals being done. So, what are you seeing there on the front lines?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. So and different things, unlike anything they've ever attempted to do before. And it's been gratifying to see our occasion. I mean, we've had so many training sessions. We've had over 14,000 agents participate at any given time, to so much that we've had to offer. This pandemic has really, really raised the bar of working remotely. I mean, the most anyone ever did was they took a cell phone call. Now it's way beyond that. Learning to Zoom, learning to go to meetings, learning to take a training class. I mean, it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. And it's good that we are doing this. It's unfortunate the circumstances under which we're doing it. But in the end, I think we're all going to come out of it better professionals and better at what we've been doing for so long on such a high level. I just think it's a really good thing.
Yeah. So, we're seeing these innovations come out, and we're seeing more efficient style of doing things, both in terms of communicating with our colleagues, communicating with our clients, prospects. I'm selling a townhouse to a client of mine in Brooklyn, and we're looking at things virtually. She's in her house, I'm in my house, and we're just coming up with a more efficient way to do things. It's amazing.
It's great. I mean, it really is extraordinary, isn't it? And I truly believe that this will change the business. Not totally, because nothing ever changes things totally. But the truth of the matter is, this is really a good thing. First of all, it probably saves your client a lot of time and you a lot of time too. And yet the two of you together can really focus on the things that are more important to making the transaction happen, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's incredible. And we're continuing to do closings. Those closings are happening remotely. We pick a date on which to close. Money's being wired, and documents are on hand being signed remotely by notaries. There are sort of layers of these remote things happening behind the scenes. And then at the end of the day, we're closed. Congratulations.
It's incredible. It just speeds up the whole process, doesn't it? And
it really does.
Delay anything. You see where the delays are, and you can solve the delay much faster than you ever could in real time, whatever that is.
Yeah, that's true. So, Stephen, have you heard of anything happening recently with these remote closings that could have been avoided, and any potential hurdles that we might know about from these mistakes that have been made over the last few weeks?
No, the only thing that I keep hearing over and over is, the actual document being signed on the actual day of the closing with the county clerk. I mean, I think, and this is actually a good thing, because this will get changed, and this will be a big change moving forward, because clearly the Real Estate Board of New York is on this case, and a lot of the lawyers are on this case. And there's a lot of discussion with the governor's office on this issue. And I think this will be changed sooner rather than later. And that will make it so much easier moving forward, that this isn't like a one-off because of the pandemic. This is actually going to be a good thing for everybody moving forward. So that's the only piece that's sort of been a little worrisome for a lot of attorneys on these closings. But I think that's going to get solved.
Yeah, well, there are obviously potential hurdles to overcome with all innovations. We're in growth mode still, and as I'm talking to our friends around the country, whether it be Janelle down in Dallas, Texas, or Tim Smith in Orange County. The other day, I was speaking to a friend of ours down in Brevard County, Florida. all these markets have one thing in common, and that is that they're very active. And so that gives me great confidence to know that once the stay-at-home order is lifted and things gradually get back to normal, that there's actually demand out there for housing in our local market within New York City and the boroughs.
I totally agree with you, Josh. You're absolutely right on the mark here. I mean, look, we've all been quarantined, right? We've all been sequestered indoors for the most part. And, there's a certain gestalt that's involved with that. Once you're set free, you want to reward yourself. And I believe because we all spent so much time in our homes that now we see the good side of it and the not so good side of it, and how we'd like to change that. And I actually believe and I know you do too, that there is a lot of pent-up demand here, and that it will actually get transferred into people buying and changing homes and moving in different directions, whether that's down the street from where they live or within their own building, or quite frankly, maybe outside of the city. If nothing else, I think a lot of people are going to be interested in second homes moving forward. Because a lot of people, even though there's a lot of talk about possibly leaving the city, I'm not so sure that that's so accurate. I don't believe in the end that most people will leave the city. They may feel that way right now, but once it gets back to reality and a normal way of going to work and taking your kids to school and all the other things that get involved in that, it'll all come back to reality, and you realize, this is really a really good place to live.
Yeah. Well, New York City has proven one thing for sure, and that is that it has always been the international center of commerce and, of course, culture, right? So people are thinking that just because, their favorite restaurant down the block might not be open when they get back, that it's not the end of days. So, there are other restaurants, there are constantly new concepts. What was popular last spring may not be popular next spring. And obviously, restaurants are going to have some challenging times ahead of them. But once things get back to normal over the next 6 to 12 months, you're going to see New York more popular than ever.
Yeah. Josh, it's the capital of the world. The capital of the world. That's not going to go away. Why would it? And if it does, it's going to take a lot longer than, a few weeks or a couple of months. But I don't believe that's ever going to happen. It's still the place that people want to go. Every person that's, living in middle America, some young kid, dreams of their future, in that thinking is New York City. And that's true all over the world. And I don't see that changing. I don't.
No.
For those
certainly,
people who
certainly
go,
not.
there are just as many, if not more, willing to come in and take their place. And that's why someone like you, who's a great broker, is there to help them in that process.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we've been through it before, right, Stephen? We
Yeah.
saw the dot-com collapse in 2000. Then we saw September 11th. Then we saw Lehman Brothers. And we saw Hurricane Sandy, which was more of a regional event. But these are all largely exogenous events. In 2008, it was more housing focused. This is an exogenous event. And we see, a number of pharmaceutical and biotech companies working together with the federal government to establish testing facilities, to establish vaccines. These are all being fast tracked. And so I have a feeling that things are going to come together much more rapidly than anyone imagines.
I totally agree with you. I mean, I think there are going to be all kinds of directions that we're going to be surprised at who comes in and wants to start building a business here in the city that wasn't here before. I think there are lots and lots of opportunities, and we have enough space to do that. We've got, a lot happening in Brooklyn, a lot happening in Queens. I mean, there are all kinds of areas of this city where so many different things can, be moving in a more positive direction. I mean, I remember the late 80s crash of Wall Street and the year after, the absolute total collapse of the real estate market. And a lot of people said then, oh, it's all over. Forget about the co-ops. Forget about buying a property. People lost 100% of their equity. And I kept thinking to myself, but the basics are here. It doesn't make sense for it to go away. People still want to live and work in the city. And if they work in the city, they need a place to live. And they certainly ultimately don't want to rent as much as they want to own property, to get into the real estate game, to get into building up equity so that they could, get a return on their money. And sure enough, it came back, and it went up, up, and up, and it's still going up, even though it slides back down on occasion, because that's the ebb and flow of the market. But gosh, I think the basics are still here for us.
Yeah, so you're talking about the foundations of the city being here and will always be here, regardless of what happens.
I sure think so. I feel so, and I know a lot of people feel the same way.
Yeah, well, I certainly do. Having been through it before and seen these ups and downs. I wasn't around for 1987, but it's always interesting to hear the perspective of someone like you who was. Coming back to the workforce is going to take some time, obviously. And, there are some people who are going to be staying up in Connecticut, or people who are staying out in the Hamptons or at their beach house. But it's going to be a gradual progression to normal levels, which, as you pointed out earlier when we were speaking offline, might not be until the fall, because people are getting back into the swing of things, bringing their kids back to school, etc. Where do you think things will be, and what do you think the sort of opening schedule will be, going forward?
Yeah, well, the governor has, his executive order until May the 15th,
Right.
and we're in the second level. The first level is going to take about 2 weeks, and we have a set number of metrics in the city that we need to meet, seven different areas. And so far, we've only met 3 of those. We have 4 to go. And those are going to be a bit of a challenge. So there is some question as to when we're actually going to be able to start showing again. But I'm sort of thinking, and I don't think I'm alone in this, that we're talking about somewhere right after the 1st of June. Somewhere between after the 1st of June and June 15th, we may be able to start showing properties again. And I think that's the key. I mean, look, it's all fine and dandy to say that we're back in business and we're going to open the doors. Most people probably are not going back into their offices. But they're going to start thinking and planning their business. And I think the minute the word is go, you can start showing properties, will be the real beginning thrust of back to the business.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, Stephen. Have you seen anything remarkable in terms of what agents are doing or have done? Any listings that have come online? Any particular deals that stood out to you just over the last, say, 4 to 6 or 8 weeks? That we've all been at this stay-at-home order.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is, virtual showing. Working remotely has been a real challenge, but also kind of a fascinating process. And it's a puzzle to sort of figure that out. And I think a lot of our agents have. I think a lot of agents in general have figured it out. That there are all kinds of companies that are coming out of the woodwork, say, I can help you with this, and I could string photos together and it'll look like a virtual tour. Look, that is a good thing for the consumer out there. That's a really, really good thing, because they're in their homes too. They're sequestered, they're quarantined, so they can take a look at these properties. And the more that we can enhance what we have visually, whether it's a photograph or maybe a home video or something like that, this consumer is going to benefit from that. And I think there are more and more things as we move further in this, with people helping us and companies helping and coming up with ideas and beautiful presentations and just setting it out there for the consumer so they can make an educated decision, because there are deals being made virtually.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you share with us any specific examples of deals being done over the last, say, couple of weeks?
Well, the one that sort of got my attention was an agent got a buyer virtually. They had a conversation. They connected Zoom wise. That agent started showing them properties via Zoom, all kinds of things, and going over all different kinds of areas and pinpointing where they wanted to be. Found a group of properties for that consumer to take a look at virtually online, which they did, and they went through all of those things. And in one particular case, there was a seller who had, between cell phones, showed their property to our broker and their customer, and a lot of questions were asked. and an offer was made, and it took several offers, and 2 days later there was a contract out, and 2 days after that the contract was signed.
Wow.
So it's doable, and it's also believable that it's doable.
Yeah.
The key to a lot of this is, whether they can actually close or not. That, once you get to the closing part, a lot of consumers are a little leery about actually closing on the property unless they can actually move in and the seller can move out. So,
Sure.
those things are being worked out, and in many cases they're being accomplished. And as we move further along in this, there'll be many more closings taking place, because that won't be so much of an issue.
Yeah. And do you know if that New York City, we're being asked by our colleague Doreen Courtwright, uh, whether or not that buyer was in New York City, or were they, somewhere else outside of
They,
the
they
city?
were in New York City. They lived in New York City. They were in a rental.
Okay. Yeah, because it always helps, right? If the person is familiar with the neighborhoods and the nuances of the blocks, and they might not be able to get into the apartments, but they can certainly figure
Exactly.
out, where they want to live. So that's helpful.
Exactly.
You mentioned something interesting, Stephen, which is that people aren't necessarily wanting to close until they can move into their homes, and so we're seeing a couple deals that we have in contract, one of which is at Greenwich Lane, another one is in Soho, and these buildings have restrictions on moving. You can't move in, you can't move out, and you can't do what they're deeming to be non-essential work, right? So obviously, if you're buying most homes in today's market are resales, not new developments. So it's understandable that a buyer is going to want to do some basic work to the unit, whether it be refreshing the paint, or refinishing the floors, or maybe doing some closet work. So you can't do that. And so what we're seeing with these deals that we're helping people with is that the buyers don't want to close on something that they can't necessarily use. So they're sort of pushing the closings back as far as possible, and sellers are actually being understandable in that. And so they're not mandating that the buyers close on these properties, and everybody's sort of sitting tight and waiting for this to pass like a bad storm.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, and to your point about the sellers understanding and letting it drift a bit, it's perfectly understandable. They're in the same boat. I mean, how are they going to get out? If the buyer can't move in, the seller certainly can't move out, because the building has put the restrictions. So everybody's in this together, because we're all living this together. And
Sure.
so you have a greater sort of emotional appreciation from where someone's coming from if the same thing is happening to you. So, it will take time. And the most important thing is that they know that they have a home to go to, that they're going to close on it, and they're going to be really happy when they get there. And they're going to take the time that it takes. I think in the first phase of the openings, I mean, about the construction, there will be more opportunities, uh, because the governor's office says it's okay for more construction to take place. But when it comes to these buildings and renovations of buildings, that might take a little bit longer, because the buildings are still very, very overly cautious about it all, and understandable so.
Oh yeah, I mean, no doubt about it. We definitely have to be careful in what we're doing. We can't just jump back into the pool, because we're seeing states like Georgia and Florida, California opening up their beaches. Of course, I saw the other day that Florida opened up their beaches, and so they had something like 9,000 people in one Miami park. I think it was last Saturday afternoon. And you saw people out there running around, without their shirts on, no masks, no preventative or protective gear, and then they immediately shut down the park. So they're trying to figure out a happy medium with which to open up and do it safely.
Yeah, that's a huge challenge, isn't it? I mean, I understand that everybody wants to be set free and to at least, get out to a beach or to a park. I get it. But so does everybody else. And so then you have an overabundance of people. But the thing that I'm just blown away by is the social distancing just isn't existence when this happens. You're right, no mask, and certainly, people are, bundled together, and I don't think that's smart at all. I mean, I wish that people were more prudent about it, but I don't think that's going to be the case.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Time will tell for sure. I mean, as we get back into the swing of things, it'll be an interesting time, for us in the city's history for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We will not forget this.
No, that's for sure. Stephen, I'm curious, where were we as a company and as a market earlier this year before the pandemic really set in? So, talk to us a little bit about January and February and how the year was starting to shape up.
The year was starting so well, so unbelievably well. We'd spent, the latter part of 2018 and all of 2019 trying to get the sellers much more realistic and working to get them to understand that pricing was the most important. And we made huge progress. I mean, really, really huge progress. And by the time that we rolled into January of this year, 2020, our contract signs were up 33% year over year. An absolute statement of all the hard work that we did in 2019. And it continued through February, not at that high intense level, but it still continued. It was still better year over year. And then in the beginning of March, the same sort of thing, we were on track. And then by the middle of March, bingo, for the obvious reason, it all came to a screeching halt. But it's interesting when you look at inventory, new listings, in the first quarter were only down 19% year over year. Now, you might say, but we've always, for the last, 5+ years, we've always had an issue of low inventory. But 2018 and 19 saw a rise in inventory. I mean, we were really, really moving up. So, and which is not a bad thing, by the way, because it wasn't snowballing. It's actually a really good thing. But the fact that the new listings were only down 19% is pretty extraordinary to me. The closings were down like 36%. So those are things that clearly had been in contract for at least 90 to 120 days, prior to the pandemic. But still, the closings were only down 36%. That strikes me as a very positive thing. All this goes back to the idea that we talked about earlier in this conversation, which is, pent-up demand. Is it really going to slide? Are prices going to fall? Are there going to be less sales? I don't think so. Maybe a little bit of those things, but until we start to get our equilibrium and our footing back in place, I think the basics are there. I think the consumer is willing to commit to New York City, and they're willing to look at real estate and commit to real estate. They have to feel comfortable about it, and I think they will feel comfortable about it. But I think, again, we're in a really good position when we come out of this to start moving. Not as fast as everyone would like, but I think the timing will take care of itself. And the prognosis, I think, is a very, very positive one.
I tend to agree with you, Stephen, and primarily thanks to the Federal Reserve coming in, with the size of the stimulus and the pace with which they were able to implement the stimulus, enabled the equity markets to bounce from their March lows, and they're continuing to go higher and higher. But one fear that I have is, they're bouncing so high that maybe that's unsustainable. And so if we see the equity market sort of trip up a little bit over the next few weeks to a month, these stay-at-home orders are going to be lifted just when volatility picks up, and that is what really closely correlates with consumer confidence in our market. So while I agree with what you're saying, I have to say that I'm a little concerned about the stability of the equity markets, because as those tend to waffle, we see that trickle down very quickly into consumer confidence in our local market, predominantly because we're seeing so many people buy properties in New York City who are employed one way or another in finance.
Yes, you're right. I mean, it's worrisome. It's something that everyone's got their eye on. I, the interest rates are phenomenal. No doubt about that. They are phenomenal. 30-year fixed is in the twos now. So I'm sure there will be some sort of, a little bit of frenzy of refinancing if they can. But the thing to remember too is the banks have, made it a little bit tougher to get a mortgage. And I goes to your point about the worrisomeness of it. But I think the basics are there. I think that, yes, there will be some sort of, pushing here and some worrisome here and some, maybe pullbacks a bit, but not enough, I think, to kibosh the market.
Yeah, yeah, I tend to agree with you, Stephen. One question that comes to mind is a lot of the conversations that I and I'm sure our colleagues throughout the city have had is not just with prospective buyers who, in my experience, are staying the course and continuing to look, wanting to buy, their new home, whether it be a larger home or downsizing into a more efficient space, but with sellers. And do those sellers list now? Do they list as soon as the stay-at-home order is lifted? Let's call it, May 15th, June 1, or do they wait until the sky is much more clear and people are coming back from their summer homes wherever they may be and doing so in the fall, which of course is in the face of the election.
Yeah. I just don't believe that the consumer is going to jump so quickly, be it buyer or seller. I
Mm-hmm.
think, like everyone else, I think they're going to be pretty prudent. They've lived through this. They're not going to make stupid decisions. I think they're going to survey the landscape. They're going to see if it's safe. If they feel that it's safe, they're definitely going to start looking. If they feel it's really safe, they're going to start bidding. And if they feel that the prognosis for the future is really terrific, then I think they're going to commit. But I think,
Yeah.
the greatest thing that's changed our business since I've been in the business is the internet. Everybody is looking, whether they're out physically looking at property daily, they are looking online daily at real estate. So the consumer is pretty savvy out there, has a pretty good handle on the real estate market, whether they're actually looking at the properties or not in person. They're definitely looking online. And I think that's a really, really good thing. And so they're aware of what's out there and what's available. And they're actually really aware and have enough information to know that whether something is a good deal or not. So that's been a plus, and I think that will continue to help this whole process.
Yeah. That you raise a very good point in that, today's consumer is more informed than ever thanks to all the information that's online and available to them.
Yeah, it used to be that an agent did not divulge any information whatsoever, ever, not what was on the market necessarily, certainly not what sold. And if it sold, they never, ever gave the price. Then that all changed in 85 and 86. And that was for the good of the consumer, for the obvious reason. And now everything is full exposure. In many cases, the consumer knows more than a lot of real estate agents. And one of the reasons why is because they have this sort of like, they can do it in the quietness of their own home, right in front of the computer screen. And they could do it for hours on hours without anyone knowing that they're doing it, but they know they're doing it, and they are knowing that they are learning so much about it. So they're pretty, the buyer today for real estate is pretty savvy.
Stephen, I have to ask the obvious question. You have this uncanny Southern charm. Where did you pick that up?
I'm from a little town. Actually, it's not so little. It's 35,000 in North Texas, north of Dallas, called Sherman, Texas.
Oh.
And yeah, I graduated from the University of North Texas in Denton with a degree in education and speech and drama. And I was accepted into the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. That's
Wow.
how I got to New York.
Uh-huh.
And I spent 2 years there. And I was like 21. And I set a goal for myself that by the time I was 30, if I had not met with the success that I thought that would propel me into further success as an actor, then I would do something else. And that's exactly what happened. When I turned 30, I stayed true to the commitment that I made to myself. And of course, I didn't know what I was going to do. So I said, a friend of mine said, Stephen, you really should think about real estate. You're very good with people, and you have a real interest in, how people live and buildings and stuff like that. That would be right up your alley. And I said, real estate, that's business. Who wants to do that? But I sort of thought about that for a while. And I thought, you know what? Okay, I'll do it. So I went to the New York Times and answered an ad in the New York Times for an agency in Scarsdale, New York. And I called the guy up, and he said, where are you calling from? And I said, West Side. He said, West Side? That's Manhattan. You live on the Upper West Side in Manhattan? And I said, yes. And he said, do you know where Scarsdale, New York is? I said, can I get to it on the train? He said, you don't have a car? I said, no, but I can get a car, and can I get to the train? He said, can you come up this afternoon at 3:00? And I did, and he hired me on the spot and sponsored me for my license.
Huh. And so what made you end up in Scarsdale? I mean, why not answer an ad for an agency in the city?
I felt that the people in the city were far more experienced than I would ever be, and that I wouldn't compete very well. And I wanted a sort of a low-key environment to learn the business. And I stupidly thought that would take place in Scarsdale, New York. By the way, I didn't move to Scarsdale. I stayed. I did a reverse commute every single day on the Upper West Side from where I lived.
Wow. So did you end up ultimately having to get a car in order to work that market?
I bought one, within like 3 weeks.
Yeah, makes sense. If you're going to be working in a market like Scarsdale, there's only so far you can get by foot, right?
Yes, and I didn't buy a Mercedes, by the way, which was, probably not the wisest thing in the world. But I realized after the first year, I learned how not to do the business. I learned to keep my mouth shut. I learned really, really the hard value of listening, because that's the key to everything. And I learned one other really, really important lesson. That lesson was, you need to sell where you live, because you have built-in validity that no other agent does unless they live in the same place, in the same area where you do. And so I decided to come back business-wise to Manhattan, and I answered an ad in the New York Times. It was hired by an agent, and almost instantly, I started bringing in listings and doing sales. And I'm convinced that the biggest reason why that happened so fast for me, one, I'd already done the year's work of hard work, but I think more importantly, I could talk about the neighborhood that I was showing in because I lived there. It had a whole different ring in my voice when I talked to someone, because it was my home, and they identified with that. And because of my enthusiasm, they wanted to live there too. So I still think that's a very, very important lesson I learned.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to sell a product that you actually have conviction in selling, right?
Yeah.
I've often said that it's kind of like, selling a foreign car. And if you're selling a foreign car, you better drive that car. If you pull up in the parking lot, driving a Toyota when you're selling Porsches, then your colleagues and your customers are going to look at you kind of funny.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And
So,
may even say insulting things.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, especially not about me.
I wouldn't dare.
Stephen, how did you make the leap from, Scarsdale, you came to the city, you started bringing in listings and doing deals on the Upper West Side and the various neighborhoods in Manhattan because you had conviction in that. And how did you make the leap from salesperson to sort of, executive suite or management?
I didn't want to do it. I like selling, and I like brokerage. I like working with people and showing properties and looking at properties, and I like that a lot. And I didn't want to be a manager. And the The first time someone came to me from a major company for me to be a manager at their company, I said, no, I don't really want to do that. And he said, but you know, so many people like you, and they ask for a manager that's a lot like you, and I would like for you to be a manager at my company. And I said, you know, I'm very flattered by that, but no, I don't see that in myself. So no, I'm not going to do that. And then 2 years later, the same thing happened with someone else. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. I really, really like selling. I don't think I have anything to offer. After that second go around, I started thinking to myself, maybe there's something here that I'm not seeing in myself that other people are. And I owe it to myself to kind of explore that and sort of, you know, work my thinking about whether that's something that would be good for me, and whether that's something that I would be good at, and whether that's something that I would want to do. And the minute I did that, the minute I made the decision that I would be open to it, I had two companies come to me at the same time to become a manager in their companies, and one of those was Douglas Elliman. And I'll never forget Alan Rogers, who hired me, who was the chairman of Douglas Elliman at the time when the Milsteins owned it. I said to myself after my second interview with him, I said, I want to work for this person. This person can really help me go to a very different level that I would never have thought of up until today. And I made my decision on the base, and it was the best decision I ever made in my life.
Wow. And what was it about that person that said that gave you that confidence and enabled you to see them as being the type of person that could help you get to, you know, an entirely different level professionally?
He was really, and is really, really smart, really, really savvy, has a really, really inherent, innate instinct about real estate. Certainly, you know, on all levels, but especially residential. And he has an enormously great sense of humor, which appeals to me because I like to laugh.
Yeah, yeah. And who was it? Who was the person that you interviewed with?
Alan Rogers.
Alan Rogers. Got it.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, you know, you've done a wonderful job with Douglas Elliman. I know, you know, all of the agents and management really admire you, and you know, everything that you've done and accomplished both personally and professionally. So you know, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, Stephen. It's been really a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Josh. I really, really enjoyed it. And thank you for having me on.
My pleasure. Stephen James, CEO of Douglas Elliman's New York City brokerage. Been great to have you, Stephen. Thank you.